everybody. Welcome to our session, which actually we decided to have inside the conference, our annual April conference of High School of Economics. And our session is devoted to strategic responses of entrepreneurial firm to global crisis and digital transformation. And let me tell you a few words before we start. First of all, we have a video recording of our session, and that's why if you don't want to be online, because after this session we are going to put this record to the internet, and that's why actually if you disagree, please you turn your camera off, because you cannot stop recording. And we have 4 brilliant presentations, and actually we have 20 minutes for each paper. It means that all our presenters have 15 minutes for the presentation and then 5 minutes for questions, comments, and discussion. And then actually perhaps we will have 5 minutes after all presentations, and all our participants actually will be able to share their thoughts, ideas, comments, etc. And let's start with the first presentation by Sergey Anokhin, who is professor in St. Cloud State University, United States, and he is going to tell us about social entrepreneurship during crisis aftermath. The floor is yours.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation to the conference. I am excited to present the paper that I am writing currently with Todd Morgan. Todd is a very good colleague of mine, and he's a very talented scholar. So whatever good you see in the paper is his, and then whatever mistakes you find would probably be mine. And this paper is about social entrepreneurship during the crisis aftermath. So here what we do is we look at not the crisis as such, not the crisis proper, but we look at what happens immediately after. Because crisis situations, typically when you have them, they are rather limited in duration. Yet the recovery from crisis typically takes a long time. We may talk about market failure following the crisis. We may definitely talk about government failure, where governments introduce different austerity programs and they limit whatever kind of support they may give to the people or to the companies. So those periods that are characterized by sort of unusual, unprecedented circumstances is what we want to analyze when we look at the creation of social ventures. And first of all, some definitional issues. When we talk about social entrepreneurship, we imply the process involving the innovative use and combination of resources to pursue opportunities that catalyze social change or address social need. So the second part, social need, is probably what is more closely aligned with the nature of our research, of our study. And specifically, the way we look at social entrepreneurship is fairly broad. We look at it as a creation of social organizations, or even more specifically, creation of organizations with an explicitly social dimension in their mission. So there are many ways of defining social entrepreneurship, and it could be any kind of organization, for-profit or non-profit, that tries to do something that is explicitly helpful, that is explicitly pursuing goals of the society and not so much profit-seeking motives of an individual. So we here look at organizations that have been acknowledged to have the social perspective, and simply put, nonprofits. And I want to emphasize that upfront, because some of the things I will be talking about may not necessarily apply to for-profit businesses in much the same way as they do to nonprofits. So we talk about organizations that have explicitly acknowledged social agenda, and that's that. Now, why are we looking at that? So obviously, social entrepreneurship research has been around for quite some time, although not terribly long. We do know a few things about the creation of social organizations, but largely what we know about it is limited to case studies Right? There's been a lot of studies that try to look inside social ventures, and when it comes to larger level research on social entrepreneurship, quantitative research, the studies that look at environmental impact on the creation of social organization, we actually know fairly little. So we kind of go maybe deep into some of the social entrepreneurship processes, but we do not cover anything broad. And our goal is to help with that. So we know that research on environmental influence is scarce. There's almost no research on the impact of environmental influences on social venture creation, and whatever is there is typically not quantitative enough to be able to generalize to the larger population of social ventures. So this is where we try to come in, and this is where we try to make some difference in the literature. So what do we know about social venture creation processes? We understand the process as such. We understand that it is based on individual, organizational, and environmental factors. We understand that the market failure is a big player, is a big factor contributing to the creation of social organizations. We know that social companies, social ventures are often created to address the problems that both markets and governments have failed to deal with directly, or at least effectively, right? So it's when there are issues that neither the markets nor the governments can tackle, then you will expect the creation of social organizations to intensify. At least this is what our conceptual literature says, but so far the empirical evidence of that is quite limited. So we want to help out. And we know that generally there are different factors that could affect social entrepreneurship, such as social and business context, complexity of the environment, government policies. But again, more often than not, those are just the factors that emerged from some case studies or maybe conceptual thinking. And we're trying to see if indeed what the research says, what the prior conceptual literature says, uh, would be observed in real life. In terms of our conceptual framework, a lot of our development is based on a classic new venture creation literature. So this whole notion of entrepreneurs responding to opportunities, which is what we believe social entrepreneurs do, right? So to them, situations that are characterized by failure of markets and governments are in fact social opportunities. So that notion comes from the larger entrepreneurship literature, and we try to apply it to this specific context. We look very specifically at two types of failures as a potential motivator for entrepreneurs to consider the creation of new organizations. And these are the market failure and the government failure. Market failure basically refers to the inability of a market economy to reach certain desirable outcomes in resource use. And basically, you would see, well, I guess from the economics theory, you know, that there are many situations where markets fail. So think about the pure monopolies, think about oligopolies, and all of those suboptimal things that happen. When resources are underemployed, when there are opportunities to increase the effectiveness of their employment, right, so towards Pareto optimal state, if those opportunities exist, it means the markets have failed. And we are interested in a very specific dimension of that, and I'll talk about that in a second, but that's one major issue we're going to look at. The second one is the government failure. And this is the inability of the government to facilitate efficient resource allocation. So the government also has its role. It is not necessarily a market participant that can also engage in manufacturing processes or anything of that nature, but it creates the institutional environment, it creates welfare programs that are meant to facilitate this more efficient, at least conceptually, theoretically, resource allocation, and governments often fail to reach this objective. So we are going to look at these things as the foundation for our conceptual framework. And then, of course, we see social entrepreneurship as a response to these two kind of failures. And here we base our thinking on a paper by Austin et al., who say that entrepreneurs, social entrepreneurs, pursue these kind of opportunities not despite of, but because of an hospital context and hospital business environment. So this is where our expectations come from. This is what informs our thinking about the processes that could affect social venture creation rates. So that's the foundation, that's the stepping stone. With respect to market failure, so first of all, there's actually very rich literature, very voluminous literature on market failure, and then some of it comes from economics, some of it comes from other research traditions. Given the limited time I have, I will not necessarily go to review all that literature, but I will say this. So by resulting in inefficient resource allocation, market failure negatively affects the socioeconomic conditions in a region. So when markets fail, you're going to see things like higher unemployment rates, you're going to see things like lower income per capita. So socioeconomic conditions as a result of market failure become less than exciting, right? So they leave much to be desired, and that is a very important thing. Because suboptimal socioeconomic conditions, the literature has said it fairly explicitly and very clearly, they give rise to social value creation opportunities, which in turn we expect would entice the creation of social ventures. So our first hypothesis here is very straightforward, and those suboptimal socioeconomic conditions would positively influence the creation of social ventures. So this market failure that manifests in those suboptimal socioeconomic conditions will be positively related to the creation of social ventures. The second thing, as I said, is the government failure. And typically, we know that social ventures are created when there's this perceived difficulty in addressing a social need through traditional welfare mechanisms. So if governments are effective in redistributing wealth, in helping out those affected by poor socioeconomic conditions, then social entrepreneurship is not necessarily needed that much, right? The issues are addressed. If the government fails to do that, this is when you may expect to see more of social venture created to address the problem. We know from the literature again that the emergence of social entrepreneurs is higher where the provision of social services such as welfare is scarce. So basically, government failure to ensure efficient resource allocation through programs and policies should be seen as a source of opportunities for social venture creation. And we know that entrepreneurs respond to opportunities, right? So this whole individual opportunity nexus. So our second hypothesis is again fairly straightforward, that government failure in dealing with social issues is positively related to social venture creation rates. And then the third hypothesis is the sort of interaction hypothesis. So what happens if you have both kind of failures simultaneously? Because neither governments nor markets operate in isolation, and there would be often a situation where maybe the government fails to create some decent institutions, decent incentive structure, and as a result, market fails. Or maybe there's a market failure, there's poor socioeconomic conditions, and for whatever reason, the government is failing to address, to somehow alleviate the issues. So those kind of problems are known in the literature as the wicked problems, which, I kind of like the label. So these are the situations where neither markets nor the government are able to address resource allocation inefficiency, and we expect that those situations will be like super conducive to the creation of social organizations. So that would be the kind of circumstances where social venture creation should be at its maximum. And these are three very basic hypotheses that we're looking at this paper. In terms of the data, so the data comes from the US, very specifically the state of Ohio. It is a very convenient state for entrepreneurship research because it is highly representative of of the entire US on a number of dimensions pertaining to entrepreneurship. So the entrepreneurship rates in the states are very similar to what you see in the entire US. Social venture creation rates are almost the same. They almost match perfectly, completely. Income levels are the same. So it is a very typical state that has also been used in the literature as a comparison base for international studies. So economies such as Sweden are sometimes compared to the state of Ohio because of certain, I guess, structural similarities and size and whatnot. It has counties that are fairly urban, suburban, and rural. So in terms of the generalizability of our research from this specific sample, we feel rather confident that we will be able to provide meaningful and generalizable observations. We look at the period after the dot-com bubble crash, and that is essential, right? So we don't want to look necessarily at the crisis. We want to look at the crisis aftermath because typically the recovery takes a significant time, and prior research has not been very careful dealing with post-crisis recovery. So we want to find a period where the crisis has already happened and the recovery started. Until then, the next crisis hits. So we look at the period between the dot-com crash and the housing bubble crisis, because once the housing bubble crisis happened in 2008, there was a lot of interventions, there was a lot of money pouring into the economy. So we want to kind of take this out of the picture. So we look at the period from 2003 to 2007, and we look at all sorts of secondary data sources that you can find out there. The bulk of our research, of our data, comes from the Ohio Department of Development, but some of it originates from the Census Bureau, Bureau of Economic Analysis, and then all of that. And then
for I'm sorry, you have only 2 minutes left. Please, finally.
Oh, okay. So for social venture creation, you mean 2 minutes until questions start? Okay, so social venture creation will look at nonprofits being created as sort of percentage of active nonprofits. Socioeconomic conditions, we'll look at unemployment rate, because that represents a bunch of, the problematic things that could happen, and per capita income as well. For government failure, we'll look at transfer payments. So all those welfare mechanisms that are meant to help out, those disadvantaged, they are combined in this specific measure. A bunch of controls, I will not go into those. With respect to results, what do we see? That market failure actually, at least unemployment rates, is indeed positively related to the creation of new ventures. There's a strong and significant coefficient, just like you'd expect. Income per capita does not have significant relation to the creation of social ventures, so we're kind of not sure exactly what to do about it. So maybe it's not necessarily a proxy for market failure. Maybe it's the availability of financial resources that could be used towards social venture. So we want to think about that some more. Transfer payments. So those are the government interventions, the example of government failure. Indeed, they are negatively related. So the less transfer payments you have, the higher social venture creation rates you're going to see, which is consistent. And then we'll look at interactions. Only one of them is significant. this unemployment and transfer payment interaction. So indeed, we see that the best, so the most conducive environment for the creation of social ventures is the one where unemployment rates are high and transfer payments are low. So this is consistent with our expectations. What is not consistent is we expected the slope of this curve to be more pronounced. So we thought that when unemployment rate is high and transfer payments are low, then the slope of this line will be more pronounced. That did not happen, but this is sort of the only thing that did not match our expectations. So that's that. Contributions, I wouldn't necessarily go into those, we're probably out of time. And there are some limitations, but I'll be happy to talk about them during the Q&A session. So
Yeah.
let me
Thank you so much.
questions.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Sergey. Indeed, actually very interesting presentation and very interesting study. And now we have 5 minutes for the questions. Please, dear guests and dear participants, please just raise your hand or just turn your camera on, because I don't see how I can. Yeah, Alexei, please. Now I can see your hand. Yeah, Alex.
Right. Yes, thank you. I will start. Thank you, Sergey. This makes a lot of sense, and the results make a lot of sense. But I have a general question about it. Aren't social enterprises or nonprofits themselves creating this market failure that you're talking about? Because these are organizations that are not profit driven, they are not maximizing the efficiency of resource allocation, and maybe they themselves lead to, for example, low incomes in a particular region, and like basically prevent creating like typical for-profit enterprises that grow, create jobs, create welfare, and so on.
Okay, so one thing is that they definitely compete with for-profits. So we do have a paper where they compete for resources, they compete for a great number of other things, and in a way they could be seen as acting outside of the market framework, right? Because they don't pay certain taxes, so they are in a unfair advantage position. So yes, you may say that, rather than addressing a market failure, they contribute to market failure. You may have that argument. I do not believe this is necessarily the case because, consistent with prior research, they are created where for-profit, where typical entrepreneurs are not terribly active. So the competition, when we talk about competition between social and commercial entrepreneurs, it's not a competition for market opportunities, it's competition for resources, really, because they all need those same people, they all need, whatever. So we look at entrepreneurship as this individual opportunity nexus. So here we look at the opportunity, the kind of opportunities they after is different. So that's that. My personal concern with social entrepreneurs is if they are created officially to solve a particular environmental or societal ill, then as soon as they succeed, they effectively have pushed themselves out of existence, because then there's no reason for them to exist anymore. And this is what makes me deeply uncomfortable, because most organizations, they do intend to sort of live forever. Do they really want to remove the reason for their existence long term? I don't know. So I've never met anyone, I never read anything discussing this topic. I've raised it in my conversation with some researchers. I never got a satisfactory answer, except, wow, this is an interesting question. But I don't know, so it could be that there's some sort of an inverted U or something where they kind of solve the issue up to a point, and then they are, sort of slowing down to simply maintain, to stay in business. So that's that. So Tatiana, I see a hand.
I want to jump on the statement that you made. Do they actually solve the issue itself, or do they solve the results and the consequences of that issue. And I'm thinking of extrapolating your results, which I think makes sense as well, to the current situation and the notion of precarious work, when there is a lot of contracts that are short-term or not permanent, and this is a market failure and a government failure. And then I'm not really aware of the firms and how they are solving it, but they definitely have to deal with increasing unemployment or the lack of ability of the families to cope with the economic situations, especially when the crisis is global. So my question would be, do you think that you can tease that solving the issue part as opposed to solving the consequences of the negative effect of that problem?
I think for the most part, we are always fighting the consequences, right, and never the root causes. And that is true for a great number of areas. For-profits do that. I mean, look at healthcare, right? They help you manage the condition rather than solving the problem so that the condition does not manifest at all. So I think here it is a lot easier to create an organization that will help reduce some of the manifestations, because then if you try targeting root causes, then this may be too far removed from what people actually see and perceive. So in a sense, I don't want to say that this is a battle that has been lost before it started. I don't know if that's necessarily the case, and helping with symptoms, is still helping. But probably, the root causes, this is something where governments would be expected to do more as opposed to social ventures, right? So I doubt that social entrepreneurs could at any point substitute for the government. So the government fails, the market fails, here they come in and they do something and they make everybody, well, if not live happily ever after, then at least not suffer quite so much. But to solve the underlying problem, personally, I'm skeptical. So again, I don't know if people would agree, but this is not something that I've thought about too much. So this is just, ideas.
Yeah, thank you so much. Actually, we're actually out of time, and that's why we have to move to our second presentation. And thank you again, Sergey, for your participation and great job. Now, let me introduce my favorite courser and my dear colleague and friend from University of Calgary, Alexei Asiyevsky, and he is going to present his great ideas about entrepreneurial responses to crisis events, a variance-based view. Please.
Excellent. Thank you, Sergey. Thank you, Galina. Friends, thank you very much for joining us. And my question is, do you see my slides right now? Just want to make sure.
Yes, we do.
Super. Okay, marvelous. So the topic I would like to share with you right now is, to some extent, it is about rethinking about what entrepreneurship actually means. And I start this topic from the perspective of how to respond to a crisis, but at the end of the day, it has a little bit, or it has broader implications for what we understand by entrepreneurship in general. So first thing first, study motivation. We all know today that our companies, our businesses operate in VUCA environment. So volatility, instability, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity, also turbulence. So basically companies have to constantly maintain fit with their environment. And they can use entrepreneurial actions to maintain this fit with the environment, and I will discuss a little bit later what I understand by those entrepreneurial actions or strategic entrepreneurial actions. But particularly interesting context here is what happens if we have a major external crisis, when the business as usual stops working and companies have to start maintaining that feed faster than before, have to adjust faster than before. And this crisis creates a lot of threats, but also a lot of opportunities. We heard this phrase many times before, but I do believe that there is actually good logical explanation why crisis might be the best time for entrepreneurship. So let me start with a little bit illustration. I like to call it the real entrepreneur or the real innovator's dilemma. When a company is adjusting to its environment, it can engage in business as usual, which is improvement of existing products and services, making processes more efficient, selling more to existing customers. This business as usual leads to predictable performance outcomes. In most cases, predictable small performance improvements, like growth 3% a year, 4% a year. You don't have to do anything major for that. You just learn and do better what you have always been doing. Another approach for adaptation to the environment is engaging in entrepreneurial actions, trying new things, trying new products, trying to get to new international markets, adjusting your business model, reinventing your business model. The trick with these entrepreneurial actions is that their results are highly uncertain. So the variability, the dispersion of resulting performance distribution becomes very broad. Well, so this is the intuition, and at this stage I expect, well, at least for illustrative purposes, I think that on average entrepreneurial actions lead to the same results as business as usual, which is actually even not true. Empirically, we know that most entrepreneurial actions have negative performance on average if you look at them properly. Now, if this situation is true, there is something that is called survival threshold. So once the companies at the end of the year, or actually it happens all the time, the company's performance is evaluated against some threshold, and all the companies that get to the left-hand side distribution lower than survival threshold will be deprived of resources and will go out of business. And this illustration shows that the percentage of companies that engaged in entrepreneurial actions that will get below this survival threshold is way higher than this small tail of companies that would go out of business pursuing business as usual. So the dilemma here is the following. Business as usual is a safe, reliable option. Companies became established and successful because they found a product market fit. They found a niche on their market. They found a business model that works, and maintaining this business model is the optimal thing to do. On the other hand, most of the outliers, all the Snapchats, TikToks, Airbnbs of the world, they came out of right-hand side outliers. They came out of companies that tried crazy new things and were successful. The trick is, of course, if you make the careful evaluation, the thing is that in our regression models, we usually don't control for survival bias. We look at only those companies that survived, and apparently there is a positive correlation between entrepreneurial actions and performance, but it usually is a spurious correlation, not real, because we lose all the left-hand side of the distribution of those people who tried things and failed. Of course, popular business media concentrates on these great companies that became positive outliers, totally forgetting about the long left-hand side of the distribution.
Olex, we stopped seeing the slides that you shared before.
Okay, let me try to share it again. Thank you for telling me. So stop sharing. I will share again. Thank you. Thank you. This is actually a nightmare of online presentations when I simply don't see what is going on there. Do you see them now? Okay, thank you.
Yes, yes. Mm-hmm.
Thank you, thank you. And again, please tell me if my mic stops working or slides. So essentially, two approaches: either do entrepreneurial actions with huge variability, getting positive outliers, or doing business as usual. So the dilemma here is business as usual is safe. In most cases, it works better. Entrepreneurial actions, empirically speaking, usually have negative expected performance. However, most outliers, most great companies that are darlings of media, they come from entrepreneurial actions. This dilemma is hard to resolve. However, one of the most interesting thing is when business as usual stops working, which is when we are in state of crisis, when you cannot sell to your customers anymore, or your customers cannot buy it anymore. This is why business creates opportunities, simply because business as usual is not a viable option anymore. And that's where I formulate a couple of hypotheses about, or propositions about this situation. So how do strategic entrepreneurial actions affect firm performance and performance variability or distribution of results? And how does macroeconomic crisis shape these relationships? So again, what are strategic entrepreneurial actions? This is where I deliberately want to remain vague. And I do believe that we have to define entrepreneurship as actions that boost variability in performance. We have to define entrepreneurship as uncertain actions that create a lot of uncertainty in the results. And actions that typically fit into the bucket of strategic entrepreneurial actions are exploration, outcomes of effectuation, radical innovation, starting new businesses or new venturing, as opposed to business as usual, which is about exploitation, incremental innovations, for a young person who is graduating, joining an established corporation rather than starting her own business, or diversified, for example, or related diversification. The thing is that all these entrepreneurial actions, strategic entrepreneurial actions, they have highly uncertain outcomes. And this gets us to ideas of strategic entrepreneurship as the source of entrepreneurial rents. The source of entrepreneurial rents is uncertainty in uncertainty in resulting performance. And usually entrepreneurs are the ones who have superior judgment for dealing with this uncertainty. Let's talk about propositions now. So proposition number one is, and this actually proposition, it has empirical validation in many studies, including our studies with Galina Shirokova and our colleagues. In stable times, entrepreneurial actions, for example, exploration, and their enablers like entrepreneurial orientation or effectuation, they have negative impact on performance and positive impact on variability of performance. So if you see my slide, and I hope you see my slide here, the distribution shifts like that. Non-entrepreneurial actions lead to business as usual, leads to predictable performance improvements. On the other hand, entrepreneurial actions on average do not work. However, they also are highly uncertain, and positive outliers are also likely to emerge from these entrepreneurial actions. If we add survival threshold, in stable times, strategic entrepreneurial actions and their enablers have negative impact on firm survival. So out of companies that disappeared, absolute majority will be in stable times those who tried new things. Entrepreneurship is about experimenting, trying new things, and failing quite often. On the other hand, companies that were doing business as usual, they have improvement in average performance, they have stable performance distribution, chances of getting to below the survival threshold are minimal. Also, in stable times, entrepreneurship has the positive impact on the probability of becoming positive performance outliers. So this simply states that stylized fact that I discussed before, that all the snapshots of the world are likely to come from people trying new things. Now, what happens in crisis? Crisis makes business as usual not a viable option anymore. So at the very least, entrepreneurs are not incurring opportunity cost of not doing business as usual. And empirically speaking, we are getting the following thing. So this comes from our article in Journal of Business Research. In crisis, entrepreneurial actions, for example, exploration or effectuation in our paper, entrepreneurial actions have positive impact on performance and also positive impact on performance variability. So in crisis, trying entrepreneurial things starts working on average, starts having positive performance implications, but also still makes it even more unreliable than before. So uncertainty gets amplified in crisis. This is actually an issue that had to be empirically resolved, because one can make an opposite argument that in crisis, trying entrepreneurial things allows you to adjust faster, and because of that, the performance can be stabilized. In practice, empirically, performance gets destabilized in crisis, so reliability gets reduced. Also, if we keep on working with this model of distributions, so basically entrepreneurial actions in crisis have positive performance implications, but still more unreliable, we get two more propositions. One is that in times of crisis, entrepreneurship improves chances of firm survival. This is something that has to be tested empirically, but I believe we already have the first empirical results for that. So in crisis, trying new things works. And finally, also in crisis, the chances of getting a positive outlier, a major gazelle, blockbuster company, unicorn company out of entrepreneurship also gets higher and higher.
Alexei, I'm sorry for interruption. You have only 2 minutes left.
Beautiful, sorry. Thank you. Thank you, and I'm actually done, or almost done. So next thing is economy level implications. So why does it actually matter? At the economy level, the key thing is that at the economy level, the average level of strategic entrepreneurial actions of individual firms has positive impact on overall performance, which basically means economy grows not because existing firms are becoming more efficient because of business as usual, but rather because of entrepreneurs trying new things. Those who fail get out of economy, they get deprived of resources and they drop out of sample, while the average in general moves up because of the positive outliers. So economies grow because of new companies becoming gazelles, unicorns, rather than because of old companies getting better and better. This effect becomes more pronounced during crisis-induced uncertainty, and it can also be proven mathematically or using this illustration. But at the end of the day, at the individual level, it might, during stable times, it does not make sense to engage in crazy entrepreneurial things. That's the major dilemma. Business as usual is a safe option to do. At the economy level, we still need people who try different entrepreneurial things, and we as entrepreneurship educators have to be open about it. In times of crisis, of course, entrepreneurship, everyone understands it, that we need it. But in stable times, not too many people, it might not be a recommended thing to do. Of course, the distribution doesn't have to be symmetric. Of course, through effectuation and things that we teach in entrepreneurship classes, we can limit the downside, keeping the upside up there. And this gets us to the agenda of disciplined entrepreneurship, how to stimulate entrepreneurship and simultaneously de-risk it. This is probably where I would like to stop. This paper summarizes our empirical agenda with Galina, with her team, and we have a lot of more additional papers that we are exploring from this perspective. And that's the end of my story right now.
Thank you so much, Alex. Yeah, I'm so proud to be part of your team. Yeah, now we have 5 minutes for your questions, comments, or suggestions for further research, please.
Tatiana.
Yeah, Tatiana. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Alex. I really like your theory grounded and well-argued model. It captures the complexity that always dissatisfied me in the opportunity as a pure search for the market inefficiency or the ability of the firm to recognize that state of the environment. And what I especially appreciate is that you are trying to extrapolate and predict that performance growth and acceleration. And because I'm working on another project about firm growth, and we specifically look at acceleration. So how can you grow faster in each moment in time than you did before? So those gazelles are blitzscalers. But we looked at different types of performance, and I wonder, and that's a favorite question from my doctoral advisor, how would you measure performance in your model? Do you think, or do you theorize that it can be any indicator, or that, for example, market size or employment size, which may be correlated sometimes, and oftentimes they are, but profitability may not? So those early blitzscalers are usually inefficient. They're dumping resources and burning cash very quickly. And if you say that those are the firms that have the highest return on investment, or something in the short term, and then you would not see the effects that you're predicting. So do you think that the performance measure in your theoretical argument will also make an important role in arguing for those effects to come into existence?
Beautiful.
And I think
Thank you.
I think you have data, right? You're thinking about testing the model itself. So what strategy would you take there?
Well, thank you for this question, and I made a note about it because as I'm putting together this model, I really need to think through all aspects. And you know, my model right now comes essentially from evolutionary models about variability, selection, and retention. At the end of the day, this is it. Entrepreneurship creates variability, then market selects, and then retain only the successful companies or successful ideas. And their idea of performance is pretty straightforward. Performance is something that allows you to attract resources. So it is what allows you to keep on raising money from investors, for example, or allows you to maintain support from the market. So my performance would be extremely narrow. Most likely it will be actually profitability in traditional profit meaning. But now I will have to think much more about how to define performance, because it is there. It is something that allows you not to get below the threshold of survival. What allows you not to get to that threshold? And it might actually change depending on the state of the company. So Uber has never been profitable and is unlikely to become profitable, but venture investors still pump money into it. On the other hand, if we look at a company like General Electric, we are quite upset because it is not profitable in conventional stage. Okay. Thank you. I really made this note because I will have to think deeply about it, but that's brilliant. Thanks. Super.
Yeah, thank you. And we have one more question. Please, Gamza, please.
Yes, Amza, hi. Actually, we are doing PhD course with Amza, so I'm happy to see you here.
Yeah, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, nice presentation. I really enjoyed it. Similar to some of the articles that we discussed during the seminar. So my question is actually, you mentioned that entrepreneurial action is good for the economy, but yes. I'm thinking that if many companies fail as a result of entrepreneurial action, then that is actually bad for the economy. It may be wise if companies are stable but follow other growth strategy, like for example, maybe advertisement, maybe other growth strategy that will still allow stable companies who don't engage in entrepreneurial action to contribute to the economy. That would be better for the economy than when companies start and they fail, and a lot of them actually fail. That, to my opinion, is bad for the economy. So maybe you can explain better.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you for this question. And this is another point that I really have to think through as I'm articulating this model. So evolutionary thinking clearly says that it is okay if bad companies are dropping out of sample. So essentially, you have to create variability or variation, then you have to select the best ones, and those who get to left-hand side of the distribution disappear. And what is more important, that average moves up because of the positive outliers. However, I believe there might be some contexts where it is actually better for companies to keep on doing business as usual and not to waste resources on crazy things. And it is essentially an empirical question to address. My model clearly is based on the assumption that it is better, But I do believe, I do hear you, and it might be suboptimal. It might be waste of resources if young people, instead of joining corporations, are starting their businesses. It is actually, we can compare South Korea, where everyone wants to join Samsung after graduation, with the United States, where particularly in Silicon Valley, everyone or most people want to start their startups. So far, United States has been growing faster. But is it going to be always like that? I am not sure. So I take your point. I believe that I need to be more careful when I state things that I was just. I have my personal bias because I do believe in the selection model, but it might not always work. You're right. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, and thank you again, Alex. And yeah, good luck with the new projects and new submissions and publications. Unfortunately, we don't have any time for any other questions, but now let me introduce my dear friend and co-author, Tatiana Romanova-Stedler, from Kent State University, United States. And actually during this lockdown and pandemic crisis last year, we decided to start, data collection, just didn't want to waste any time. And now actually we can introduce our preliminary results of our joint project. Tatiana, please, the floor is yours. Tatiana. Mm-hmm.
I'm starting to share the PowerPoint. No, actually,
Yes,
let me.
yeah, it's okay. Yeah, please.
It works.
Yeah.
No, let me reshare because that's what I want to share the screen. I tried the browsing option, but somehow it didn't work. And I think I should. Okay, you should be seeing the presentation now.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
thank you for the opportunity to share this work with Galina. And as Sergey praised the co-author, I will also praise Galina for doing a tantamount, a very heavy load of collecting the data and interviewing and bringing the structure to this whole process. So from the fixed or flux, a case study of entrepreneurial cognitive frames, we're going to look at entrepreneurial thinking and how people in general, but specifically entrepreneurs, create those mental templates that they impose on the information environment to give it form and meaning, which is a formal definition of a cognitive frame. And traditionally, researchers thought that those frames are fixed and the application of them is dynamic. Now, what it comes to the research that we are looking at, we want to really track whether those frames are indeed fixed or how entrepreneurs use them to process information, and also how they anchor or move in between different frames. So we're going to be looking at switching between the frames and anchoring within a frame. And what we think happens in the entrepreneurial minds is that both the frames and their application is dynamic. So a brief overview of the literature on this topic, you can see the cognitive frames viewed as fixed frames of references, givens, cognitive maps, interpretive schemas, managerial lenses, filters, or structures. All of these nouns point to the fixed structure that, of course, emerges over experience and time, but in essence is pretty robust. Well, the process of those applications as perspective taking, selective perception, interpretation, tacit understanding, cognition in general, and sense making and framing, which is one of the most recent terms used to give that dynamic twist to the frame, has been also suggested. So basically, we're going from fixed frames to the notion that thoughts are moving and frames are moving dynamically. And now the interesting part is what are those frames and how can we generalize from the prior research? What do we know? The theoretical foundations are anchored in two theories. One is social identity theory and the other is construal level theory. The social identity theory describes human sense of self based on the individual group membership. And Glynn and Navis in 2013 connected categorization processes with identity formation. So they say the basic definition of a category is a social construction that provides a flexible conceptual system that can be structured and reconstructed with regard to the realities of the surrounding world and particular purposes pursued. So this sets a nice foundation for our moving cognition in the entrepreneurial landscape. The construal level theory in turn describes the psychological distance of an individual and suggests that although we are naturally anchored in the self here and now, we can switch the boundaries of this anchoring and abstract or become more concrete. So abstracting means becoming more remote to this frame of reference, and concrete becoming more proximate. We're looking at the entrepreneurial environment as a complex web of relationships that is loaded with action and responsibility, where entrepreneurs have to constantly perform those actions. And so the role of identity theory in perspective taking has also been emphasized in the literature and especially in the sense making. So Wyke and his co-authors noted that who we think we are as organizational actors shapes what we enact and how we interpret, which affects what outsiders think we are, the image, and then how they treat us, which stabilizes or destabilizes our identity. So you see that there is a dynamic relationship going between the identity, the image of an individual, and then the confirmation or disconfirmation of that over time. And of course, entrepreneurs get a lot of feedback from their environment, as we have learned from both presenters previously as well. And so we think that the concepts of organizational identity, which have been suggested in the literature, and the founder identity, which also Gruber and Florchart in 2011 suggested in their theoretical paper that talks about the difference between the founder identities, relates to this topic. So for the founder, the anchoring can be as narrow as the self, relative to the opposites of them co-founders. So this categorization between in-group and out-group happens. With the co-founders and managers, they can perceive themselves as we, the agents, as opposed to them, the principals, or they can expand the boundary and include those investors and perceive themselves as the principals as well, as opposed to the agents. So they can switch those roles and relationships. And the founder and the employees can also be viewed together from the perspective of the founder and set relative to the competitors or the customers. But then in certain occasions, they can be embraced and included in the concept of self, and this distance then becomes more broad. So what we think happens in the mind is the motion, and typically humans move in time. And the Danish philosopher Kierkegaard said that we are living in, we are theorizing about the future based on the experiences in the past and the present. So the present is the midpoint between the moving past and the arriving future. We also know that we vary in arousal. So this axis shows the expression of emotions, for example, hot cognition, affective emotional state, whereas low cognition is the cold thinking or low arousal that is based on reason and logics. And we also talked about the distance that is the scope of self, whether it's locked into the identity and the individual perception of self, or expanding to include the co-founders, employees, and potentially customers, and even certain forms of the environment, so that environment in essence becomes flexible and moving. Now, when we put those three dimensions together, we get a what we call cognitive compass space, where people can change positions, and we believe that it is anchored in the language as well, and the narrative, the verbalization, and linguistics. And that's how we are conducting interviews. Semi-structured. We have conducted 2 waves of the interviews with the founders and CEOs of the entrepreneurial firms. Those were of various sizes and various industries. We supplemented this information with websites and secondary data from the public available statistics, and we conducted it during the first wave of the lockdowns, and then repeated the same interviews with the same individuals, but then we slightly modified the questions also to test whether our understanding of what is happening in their motion has been potentially impacted by the questions that we ask. So those that we have identified, for example, as hot cognitively, individuals who used a lot of metaphors and strong words that are emotional in their responses, we made an explicit effort to ask questions that would not hint to the emotional aspect, but would then be able to see if that manipulation changes the results. So in the process of analysis, we rely on this interview as a narrative, and here it says the organizational narrative, but in essence it's the founder and organizational narrative as temporal discursive construction that provides the means of individual, social, and organizational sense making and sense giving. So we're analyzing at the level of the sentence, and then the moving frame to deduce the dominant cognitive frame. What we noticed as well from the interviews that the relationships between the dimensions of the axis, and they're linked and anchored in Boolean algebra as well. So when you think about the focusing is zooming onto one aspect of either the time, the emotion, or the self. In terms of the comparing, it's evident from the meaning of the word to compare, where the contrast is present, and then embracing is the expanding, the inclusive frame that it includes and encounters the different dimensions, the poles of the dimension. And now I want to bring some examples from the interview. Here is the AND logical gate with that individuals processing this information focus on similarities. And I have to note that, of course, all individuals change in those different logical frames and use them, all of them, in their responses. But the quantity and the number of repetitions and anchoring in those different frames varies for various individuals. So here's an example of the embracing perspective that looks at the similarity between the airlines do not pay compensations and hence the absence of flights. Everything is simple and logical. They do not work. We do not work. So you see that this was an example where the firm perceives themselves as part of that industrial landscape, the airline industry that was grounded at the time of COVID, or nearly grounded.
Diana, you have 2 minutes.
2 minutes. Okay. Then we have the XOR logical gate, which is focusing on differences, comparing. We, unlike many of our competitors, do not have any bank loans. This is an example of the statement. And the NOT logical gate that focuses on one of the decision-making poles. And here is an example where the owner talks about the perception of the employees. Well, looking at this motion, we figured that the individuals have dominant anchors, and some of them are taking more of the embracing frame. So they notice the discontinuities, they expand the self to include the employees and customers. They are highest in amplitude in terms of the low rational thinking and emotional. They switch between those fairly often. They are proactive and make bold moves as a result by switching target markets, introducing new products. This is different from those that are taking a more cautious approach, and they bridge disruptions. They notice the difference between the self and the employees and competitors more often. They remain mostly neutral and co-evolve with the landscape and the environment. They make incremental changes to the existing business models and integrate sometimes with partners. And then the third type of entrepreneurs that we see from the interviews are the entrepreneurs anchored mostly in the past with a narrow self-concept where they look at themselves as an individual and transactional relationship with employees and other counterparts and stakeholders. They rationalize negative emotions, and they are the most cautious of all three types. They take a wait and see approach, and they all of the entrepreneurs that we had in this frame were also freezing operations or somehow not making the moves that would put additional risk into the situation that they have. And here are the examples of personnel decisions, and I can go in the depth of a focusing entrepreneur who literally says that the market became tougher and we fired 8 employees. We bring 20 new on a temporary basis. Next week we leave 5, and in 2 weeks 2. So they're weeding out their workforce. A comparing entrepreneur says no one rebelled or disagreed. There was also a decision to close a grocery store from a chain when I close, so they take the personal responsibility. In Moscow, it was in agreement with the employees. Only 2 disagreed, so they noticed this difference. Others cried and said, when you open again, call us. And then embracing entrepreneur, where you nicely see this movement between the self and embracing. I pursue my own skin in the commercial game. My goal is still to save the folks with whom I work. All these guys work with me. We added new, young, hot, perspective people, but no one left. And then he says, this basically means that if something sags with me, everyone will take it with understanding and everyone will continue working. And money I will find no matter what. So this notion of relatedness is strongly present. So the theoretical implications from our research is that entrepreneurial perspective is linked to cognitive complexity and ability to switch between multiple mental states, and they convey the attitudes that they that then also are linked to the differences in behavior. Entrepreneurial actions redefined represents the behavior grounded in the broad scope of the self that embraces employees and customers and even environment for some, while others consider it as external, and therefore the locus of control and self-efficacy is not as high, and that's why they're not making the action. The cognitive compass space visualizes differences and perspectives and allows to track that motion on a linguistic scale. So this is the type of mental tracking that we were making with it. And there are also practical implications because then it suggests
Tatiana, I'm
track.
sorry.
Yep.
Yeah, I
Okay.
have to stop you. Yeah, I know it's very interesting. And actually, yes, we need to finalize it and submit. And that's other people will be able to read it. Yeah, again, thank you so much again. And we have time only for one very quick question or comment. Yeah. Okay. It looks it seems like we don't have any questions so far, but perhaps after the final presentation, guys, you can also ask any questions, actually to all participants and to all presenters. And now, thank you again, Tatiana. Yeah. And now, actually, we are moving to the final presentation by Marina Sheresheva and Ekaterina Buzulukova, and from Moscow State University and from High School of Economics. And Ekaterina Buzulukova is going to present their paper on SME strategies to meet COVID-19 crisis. Please, Ekaterina, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, Galina Viktorovna, for introduction, and I'm happy to present to you our research. Just a second, I'll share my screen. That's it. Let's check it. Can you see it?
Not yet. Oh, yeah, now we can. Yeah.
Oh, okay, that's great. Thank you very much. All right. So in our research, we decided to go deep and to make qualitative research to interview entrepreneurs and small and medium-sized enterprises to know how do they survive or which opportunities they can see in current situation. And so just a brief discussion of the situation for small and medium-sized enterprises that they have to deal nowadays. So all of them, of course, are influenced by the pandemic, and more than half they really think to continue to work or just to close, and also additional data for the current situation. Around 67% of beauty salons are now closed and they're not going to open anymore. And that's why, of course, it is a very suffering situation for most entrepreneurs and small and medium-sized enterprises in Russia. But the biggest question, what to do in such circumstances, our government suggested more than 60 different support measures. However, you can see on the slide that around 20% of small and medium-sized enterprises decided to use them. Even this decrease in salary taxes that is available for all enterprises, and you shouldn't ask for any approval to apply this. So the overall summary of the slide, because we don't have much time, is that a lot of measures, but entrepreneurs and small enterprises, they don't know about them, and some of them tried, but they received refuse about some kind of additional financing from the government side and so on. So the only strategy is to survive, is to do something by themselves and to find some new business opportunities, some new business models that they can apply in the current situation. So what are main challenges? Shifts in consumer behavior. A lot of them move online and prefer to buy products from well-known e-commerce platform. And we can see also business models change in the current situation, and the different situation with that previously a lot of small and medium-sized enterprises have. Also, it is extreme financial fragility for them. They have to pay additional costs to follow health standards, you all know, and to reduce number of clients that they can serve simultaneously. And of course, we also can see sharp reduction in demand. And now it is this tendency is increasing because of the drop of real incomes of people in Russia. And so there are strategies that they are revealed from a lot of interviews that were published in internet. So it is not our research yet. The first strategy is to receive government support and to use it to overcome this kind of situation. Then to reduce costs, to file some personnel, and sometimes it is around 80% of personnel. To deal with business process restructuring, to move digital, and to make this digital transformation that is well known nowadays. And that means also that you can do some processes more effectively and reduce number of employees to whom you have to pay some kind of salaries. And some new activities or new directions for business, opportunities for business, and a lot of them are talking about some kind of partnership with small and medium-sized enterprises or with the big companies. And our theoretical research was based on the Wang's model. He developed it based on the strategies of survival of Chinese small and medium-sized enterprises. They are doing better than we are, unfortunately. And so he stresses that it is some kind of metrics that you can see here. The first row is level of collaborative innovations, and in columns you can see problematic search. That means that they are not looking for some new opportunities. They only suffer and wait for something that is going to happen for them. And the Slack search, they're doing something in order to find new opportunities. And we decided that it is very close to the strategies that you saw from on the previous slide that were available in the internet or in the interview, and decided to test it in the Russian market. And so to study approaches of Russian small and medium-sized enterprises, how they do face some challenges that they have nowadays and that I also mentioned. Here is our methodology. So it is semi-structured interview and 6 blocks of questions that you can see here. And let me move to the results that we received. It is, in most cases, it is based on the case studies that is the most illustrative for some kind of strategy that were mentioned in the Wang's model. The first approach is, or the first company case I want to share with you is a dental clinic. And they faced with the drop in the level of demand even before the pandemic, because our economy wasn't developing fast and it was the not so big but decrease in the consumers' income level. And so they were forced to close in the period of from March to June. And of course, it was a very hard situation for them because they have to pay rent, they have to pay some salaries to doctors and so on. So their strategy to survive was to receive the unpayable credit from the government. And it is interesting to note that they they get known about it not from the government or some kind of small and medium-sized association and so on, but from the bank. And the bank, Sberbank, suggested them to move to them because they have opportunity to give them this credit that was financed by the government. And they knew about it and applied this opportunity, and they bought a new equipment, a microscope, and that allows them to enter a new consumer segment that are ready to pay more because it is more sophisticated and more successful kind of operations. And some people, they are ready to pay for it. So they use the government support and enter a new segment. The other case is illustration of the partnership strategy is a small IT consulting company, despite the fact that they have to, everybody thought that all finance resources are moving to IT services. That was the quite opposite situation. They faced with the drop of demand for all its services, because in most cases it was some kind of investment services, and all companies, they were focusing on business processing IT system like Jira, like Zoom, you all know that. And so the only strategy to survive was to make some kind of partnership with the big IT provider. In this case, it was Microsoft that suggested suggested this opportunity, knowing competitive advantage of this small company, consulting services that they suggest to their customers, and Microsoft is paying for their services to the clients of Microsoft, because in this case, clients of Microsoft are happy receiving IT consulting services about MS Teams adoptions, about development of Azure services, and so on. And of course, the small company is also happy because it has some opportunities to increase. The third strategy that were mentioned was switching to online business models. However, we are faced with contradictory situation here. Once it was a great opportunity for small and medium-sized retail companies to participate in big e-commerce platforms like Wildberries. It is easy to start business there. However, they have the special issue in the agreement that they can give discounts to clients according to their own marketing strategy. And in December, then some of small and medium-sized enterprises decided to gain the profits and to cover all of the costs that they had previously. They have to work with those discounts, and they didn't receive any profits, and that experience was dramatic for them. And that's why it is not so clear if the switch into online business model, is it really profitable for companies or not, but we are still in research, and we are now investigating ecosystems and how they can support small and medium-sized enterprises. But our research, preliminary research, shows that it is quite opposite situation. They gain additional share from small and medium-sized enterprises, and they don't allow them to make profits on those platforms because they don't have enough strength to make their own marketing strategy. That's all. Thank you very much for the attention. I tried to be brief. I know we have the end of session time nowadays.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ekaterina. Indeed, actually, yeah, and also for saving some more time for questions and comments and discussion. And now, actually, we have 7 minutes, and that's why, actually, please, you can address your questions to all presenters. Yeah, unfortunately, we don't have two. Yeah, Alex and Sergey, they, as far as I understand, they had to go. And Sergey, actually, he has to bring his kid to kindergarten, if I'm not mistaken, because there is early morning, actually, in the United States and Canada. Yeah, anyway, please, you can address your questions to Tatiana and Ekaterina, if you have. Yeah, I have a question to Ekaterina. Actually, I'm just wondering why you decided to test, you know, their model, which was created in the Chinese context, rather than just create your own, you know, model.
Thank you very much, Galina. So, Viktorovna.
It's okay, I'm Galina.
Okay, you saw that it was some kind of insights how they can small and medium-sized enterprises can survive, and we know that Chinese companies, they do it better, and that's why we our main focus is to find ways what to suggest to small and medium-sized enterprises to survive, not just to make some kind of research, how do they survive. We want to improve their performance, of course. And we decided that probably we can find some new opportunities applying this model. And of course, it is always interesting to compare some research that are happening simultaneously in the same situation and the same circumstances, but in a different country context. So that's why I suppose that we will come to our own solution, for example, for these electronic business models and moving to online. We have the opposite situation from Chinese market. You know, a lot of small and medium-sized enterprises, they can sell easily from Ali Express platform, and all these post costs they are financing by government. In our situation, they tried, but they faced with the very bad experience. Then they can't really influence on what is presented to the consumers and what final price will be there.
Yeah, thank you so much. And Tatiana, please, your question.
Thank you, Ekaterina, for the very interesting presentation. And I was fascinated to see another dental firm. We also had one in the sample, and the results and the strategies are really almost identical in terms of what they did. And what it brought to my mind is, do they really have this choice, or is it the scope of their action is limited by government support or lack of that support, and market partner ability or availability or lack of it? So in terms of implications from your research, which I think makes total sense, is can they choose the coping strategy, or are they forced into it?
I wish to say that they can choose, but really, they, frankly speaking, they can't, because to survive, they have to do something. They can't just continue do what they were doing before the pandemic. And in this situation, they tried also some kind of partnership strategy with the insurance companies. You know, you can, we have a lot of them, and we can get some clients from them, and they didn't find any insurance company that is going to add them in their list. They have their previous list of companies before the pandemic, but they put a lot of efforts in finding new just to increase the number of clients, but no one agreed, unfortunately. That's why to survive, they have to do something. And that is the same situation for all small and medium-sized enterprises. Even if we have some kind of governmental support measures, the only way to survive is to do something by themselves.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you for the question. That's great that you also have one.
Yeah. And actually, it's a very good session. I think we organized very nice bring together very good people with very interesting presentation and particularly relevant. I think actually now we have very small, I would say, window of opportunity to get published on, COVID-19 pandemic, strategic responses and all this stuff. And that's why actually I would like to wish all of you to finalize your papers and to submit them as soon as possible. Tatiana, yeah, you know what I mean. And now actually I have to close our session. And again, thank you so much all presenters and all participants for being with us this 90 minutes, and I hope to see you soon again. Thank you so much, and take care. Bye bye.